going on, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Terror Table, a horror movie podcast that is presented by the Saskatoon Podcast Network. My name is Mitch, and I'm one of your regular hosts that you hear every single week on this show. And normally I have my other co-hosts, Kyle and Boozy, with me, but they are away this week. They were away last week, and I want to assure everyone that is for no other reason than scheduling conflicts. And we are hard at work at planning and producing our next series of episodes, which is going to be on exorcism films. So we will be doing 3 full episodes, each episode highlighting a pick from one of the hosts. So we are kicking things off with The Exorcism of Emily Rose, which is Boozy's pick. Then following that, we'll be talking about Kyle's pick, The Last Exorcism, and then we'll be closing things out with my pick, Anything for Jackson. So you can expect to see those episodes pop up on our feed within the next 3 weeks. Other than that, I also want to give a shout out to a crossover series that I've started with the Daniel Epler of the Cobwebs podcast and Chris Hurtado of Inside the Sequel. The 3 of us are getting together to discuss our fantasy Oscars draft. So the first episode covers the years 1990 to 1999. The episode that will be going live on our feed will cover the 2000s to 2009. And then we will be talking about the previous 9 or 10 years on Inside the Sequel. So each of these episodes are going on separate feeds. So episode 1 is now available. You can check it out on the Cobwebs feed. Make sure you like and subscribe to that podcast because it is fantastic. I love listening to that show, and it's an honor to be a part of this with 2 other podcasts that I highly admire. But this episode that you're tuned into now is going to be a very special episode. Today, I am welcoming the Assistant Festival Director of the Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival and the co-booker for Prairie Pro Wrestling, Jeff Drake. Jeff has become a really good friend of mine over the years, and he is very well spoken and very knowledgeable about the large body of work of H.P Lovecraft. We don't skimp over any of the controversies or anything like that. We discuss the man in full, starting off with his upbringing, having a brief conversation about how he lived, and it's very interesting. I learned a lot from Jeff this episode, and I hope you guys enjoy it as well. We close the episode off with a double feature of Stuart Gordon's From Beyond and Stuart Gordon's DAGON. This episode was a ton of fun for me, and I learned a lot, so I really hope you all enjoy it as well. But before this episode begins, I'd like to tell you guys about one of our sponsors. Direct West is a proud partner of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. Is marketing getting in the way of running your business? Direct West has a local expert team right here in Saskatchewan that will work with you to build your website exactly how you imagine it. Let them help you improve your online presence and head to directwest.com to learn more. But with all that out of the way, I can let you guys get to enjoying this episode with Jeff Drake talking about the works of H.P. Lovecraft. Enjoy. What's up, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Terror Table, a horror movie podcast that's presented by the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. My name is Mitch, and I'm one of your regular hosts that you hear every single week, and normally I'm joined by Kyle and Boozy, but they are away this week. So filling in for them, I invited a good friend of mine, the Assistant Festival Director at the Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival, the co-booker for Prairie Pro Wrestling, so he's the reason why we got in touch with Mitch Clark, and we kindled that friendship. Everyone welcome Jeff Drake. How's it going, Jeff?
I'm very good. How's your hand?
It sucks. I sliced my hand open yesterday. Did I send you the picture?
Nope.
Oh, it's gross. I'll send it to you afterwards. But
Super.
yeah, I cut right through my finger. It's bad. It's not good. I had to get some stitches. But I'm happy to be at the table talking horror movies with you. And today on this episode, we are going to be focusing on the works of H.P. Lovecraft. So we are going to be doing a H.P. Lovecraft, Stuart Gordon double feature in the main feature. We're going to be talking about From Beyond and DAGON. We are also just going to be talking about H.P. Lovecraft and his history. We're not skimming over anything. We're going to talk about some of the controversial things that have happened with him regarding his work, and we're just going to have an open conversation about the influence and the impact that H.P. Lovecraft left on the horror world. And then we'll talk about both of those films. So we got a jam-packed episode for you guys today. And I wanted to bring Jeff on because I wouldn't say, I don't know if you're an expert, but you're definitely my friend who knows the most about Lovecraft out of anyone that I know. So I thought it'd be good to have you on the show.
Yeah, expert might be a stretch. I've been reading him for many years and collecting his work and watching the movies, of course. So I know a bit about him, and we'll go through some of that today.
Hell yeah. And before we get on with the show and discuss our normal things, like what we've been up to, we're gonna knock off a couple of movies that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, just have a casual conversation, and then we'll get into our main feature. So yeah, you've been in quarantine with the rest of us. You've been watching a bunch of movies. Have you seen anything lately you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, the stuff that I would normally be doing, I like to travel. I like to sit in the bar with my friends. I like to be in the theater. I like to be watching live bands. So obviously I'm doing none of that. You know what? I look back and I would have been in Florida right now. It's going to be like -50 here this weekend, and I would have been in Florida getting ready for a rock and roll cruise right now. So that's sad.
Damn. Which cruise?
It's called the Monsters of Rock.
Oh, cool.
So there's like Alice Cooper, Saxon, LA Guns, Queensryche, like kind of 80s, 90s, like hard rock metal kind of stuff. It's like a 5-day cruise. Last time I was on it, there's like 40, 50 bands. We went to Jamaica and we went to Haiti. And then you just like party and listen to music and go to Q&As and hang out with bands and stuff. So it would have been a nice break, but instead I'm in my basement watching movies all the time now.
Well, that's not so bad. At least
it's not so bad.
Yeah, at least we have that.
Yeah.
So what have you checked out recently?
What I've been watching lately is just doing some catching up on stuff that I just didn't have time to watch before. So The Vast of Night, which you watched like 2 years ago, it won the festival in 2019, right?
Right, and you were transporting, weren't you driving Joe Dante and Belinda Blasky at that time? Oh,
yeah, the only movie that I missed the entire festival, and it won the whole thing because everyone freaked out for it. I finally watched that this week.
What'd you think?
I liked it. It was good, but like everyone was freaking out over it so much. My expectations going in were super high.
Yeah, that's not the way to go into a movie like that either, because it's such a slow, dry movie.
Yeah, and you know, I told my girlfriend we're gonna watch this movie, and she's like, "Oh man, like is someone gonna get their face cut off?" And I'm like, "I don't know, maybe." And yeah, none of that happened at all. So it was different from what I thought it was gonna be, but it was good.
Yeah, it's a cool little independent movie. What else you got?
I watched High Life. It's that French movie with the prisoners that are in outer space going towards the black hole.
Yeah, so that's with Robert Pattinson, right?
Yep.
Okay, this one came up last week as well. I still haven't seen it, but what did you think of it?
Again, I wasn't sure what to expect. It was slow, but it was good. It was effective. It was, you know, like a kind of a slow burn science fiction, you know, prisoners in space movie. It got it was a little draggy in spots, and the name's not good, but it's worth a watch.
Yeah, I still want to check it out because I know Kyle Zervinsky, host of the show, he loved it, and I know Mitch Clark hates it. Like he hated that movie.
Oh, I listened to the show. I didn't hear him speaking about that one.
Oh yeah, I think it was mainly like under his breath. I just know because we've had conversations about it before, and he said he really hated it.
I saw the Empty Man, which you and I have been texting back and forth about after we watched that. Again, yeah, a movie that John recommended from the film festival, and I really liked it. And I can't put my finger on what I liked about it so much because it's not normally something that I would like. But yeah, I thought that was really good.
Yeah, it's like it seems like it would be your generic run-of-the-mill horror movie that goes to like the Cineplex, but it's actually nothing like that.
No. And the first like 20 minutes before
that's the best part.
Before the title even comes up is like craziness. So yeah, that was really good. And then the other thing I'll mention is just to get ready for our talk about Stuart Gordon and Lovecraft. I watched the Dreams in the Witch House, his episode of the Masters of Horror series. And then I went down that freaking rabbit hole and started watching a whole bunch of those again. And there's, when those first came out, I think there was a couple stinkers in there and it kind of threw everybody off the series, but there's some really good stuff in there. The one that you talked about, the incident on and off a mountain road, with the director Phantasm.
Yeah, Don Coscarelli.
Yeah, that one was really solid. The John Landis one, called Deer Woman, was really good. John Carpenter did one called Cigarette Burns, was great. The Argento one called Jennifer, I really enjoyed. And then the Takashi Miike one that never made it to air because it was just too fucking crazy, is like super great. The guy who started the series, the creator of everything, Mick Garris, he said that was the most disturbing film he's ever seen. So yeah, it didn't air, but I found it online and it's great.
Yeah, I watched that recently, like when we did an Itchy the Killer episode, and I loved it. Like it is nuts, and I couldn't imagine it being on TV, at least back then.
No, every violation you can think of, yep, right there for you, crammed into an hour.
Yeah, no kidding, crazy.
So,
well, that sounds like a nice. Yeah, I want to start going through those Masters of Horror episodes again. I've seen a bunch of them, but not all of them. I don't think I've seen the Stuart Gordon ones, so I think I'm going to go check those out after this. Cool. But yeah, a couple things that I'm going to talk about. I'll tie these ones in together because I don't know in order of when we're going to release this episode. We already have an episode locked and loaded, but we might push that one off a little bit. But I do talk about how I currently just finished reading Don Coscarelli's book, True Indie, which I loved. You'll hear more about that on the next episode or whenever that drops. But yeah, I've been wanting to go back and check out some of his movies or rewatch some, and I decided to watch BUBBA HO-TEP and John Dies at the End. So it's been years since I've watched BUBBA HO-TEP. And are you a fan of BUBBA HO-TEP?
I haven't seen that since it was brand new, and I remember it being okay. I might get more out of it now, though.
Yeah, it's a strange one because like I remember really liking it as a kid, and I always like my friend Jason and I, we were just talking about this, how we have this memory that we love BUBBA HO-TEP, but every time we watch it, it's okay, but it's not nothing amazing. His style is those independent movies where it's very much his unique vision, and like this one he crammed in. You got Bruce Campbell playing Elvis, which is of course awesome. He's always great, and especially in this role, he's awesome. Ossie Davis plays John F. Kennedy, so it's hilarious watching two old guys in a retirement home think that they are other people like Elvis Presley or John F. Kennedy, and Ossie Davis is a black man, so it makes it extra funny when he's getting all paranoid about the JFK shootings and all the conspiracies behind it. But yeah, it's just the movie itself it's fun. I think the first half is where the strengths are. It's really funny in the beginning because it's written by Joe R. Lansdale, who he wrote Cold in July. There's a movie adaptation of it from a couple of years ago that I loved. His son actually worked on The Pale Door, Aaron B. Kuntz's movie. So Joe R. Lansdale's son he was credited on that. But yeah, there's some like hilarious dialogue and some great performances, but it's just heartbreaking knowing that we will never get a sequel to this because Don Coscarelli has been planning one for a long time called Bubba Nosferatu. And it's never going to happen because Bruce Campbell's a diva and he doesn't want to do it. So like if they ever do they were talking about casting Ron Perlman as Elvis, and I'm like, oh God, no, please, no. Like, it's just such a shame after seeing, like, when you got Bruce Campbell, you can't recast him. Like, it's just never going to work. But yeah, the movies, I think the main issue with it is it's got some major pacing issues. It's like pretty slow in parts, and then I don't know, I just couldn't get a read on it. But overall, it's all right. Definitely not my favorite Coscarelli film, but I don't hate it either. The other one that I watched, John Dies at the End, it's based on the novel by David Wong. Have you seen this movie?
I read the novel and it's amazing.
Yeah.
And then when the movie came out, I kind of read a little bit about it, and everybody was saying like, no, it's so not like the book. Don't even fool yourself.
Yeah.
So I never did get around to watching it.
Yeah, and see now, so when it came out, I hated it because I love that book. I had such a good time reading that book, and reading even his sequel, This Book is Full of Spiders is even better. If anyone out there wants something good to read, This Book is Full of Spiders is awesome. But yeah, I hated this movie when it came out, and it's because it skips a massive chunk of the book, which is obviously for budgetary reasons. And watching it again today, separated from the book, I actually really enjoyed it. And I saw a lot of things that, because I know a lot of people who really did like it, but they didn't read the book. So, and, it's always one of those things where I never want to be that guy who's like, the book is better. You can never do it as good as the book or whatever. But like, it is a completely different entity, but it's pretty solid. And I think they killed it with the casting with Chase Williamson. It was his first movie role, his first role in anything. He played the lead as David, and since he's been in a bunch of independent horror movies like Scare Package and Beyond the Gates with Barbara Crampton, who we'll be talking about today at length. But yeah, Paul Giamatti and Clancy Brown in this thing. It's just another example of like Don Coscarelli's indie roots and in him sacrificing a lot of money and resources to do it his way. And there's something commendable about that. So while it's not fully successful because of, like, I think he could have used a little bit of help, because clearly they couldn't pull off like a third of that book because it's so insane.
Yeah, it's too crazy.
Yeah, it's so crazy. But the thing is, what they do pull off looks awesome. Like, there's a lot of really great practical effects in there. There's tons of creatures. The meat monster from the beginning of the book, like everyone who's read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. The meat monster's awesome. And of course, the flaccid dick on the door. It's just, it's a fun movie. I definitely give it a thumbs up now. Now that I'm more like, separated from the book. But yeah, those are the two that I checked out. I guess I'll knock one more off just quickly. I watched Rear Window again recently, like the Alfred Hitchcock movie. Are you a fan?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah,
it's been the master.
Absolutely. It's been years since I've seen Rear Window, and like, man, that movie is just still so good. And like the use of light in that film is groundbreaking. Like there, especially at the end, if you're looking for something like an old school thriller, you can't get much better than Rear Window. It's just, it's awesome. But like everything down to like the framing and the camera movements, like surprise, surprise, there's a lot to learn from Alfred Hitchcock. But Rear Window is up there as one of my favorites of his, I would have to say. But yeah, there's only one glaring issue, and that's like him, you're watching Jason Stewart watch through the window, and like he's got the neighbor across the way who's committing these crimes, and he's just got big wide open windows, no blinds, no nothing, and he's doing it all in like broad daylight. But that's just something you got to suspend a little disbelief when it comes to these types of movies, but still such a great movie. So I highly recommend going back and checking it out again.
Anybody who's not seen it has seen it because the Simpsons episode.
Yep, Simpsons, or it's been riffed on so many times. They made that Shia LaBeouf movie Disturbia, which is like basically a copy of Rear Window.
Yeah.
There's tons of movies. I'm drawing a blank on, but there's a bunch of movies that they should have done a Rear Window version with Lindsay Lohan when she was under house arrest.
I like it.
Yeah, it's in the movie. All right.
Yep. You need to be a movie producer.
Yep, that's the plan. But yeah, that's everything I checked out. So we can just get right into the main feature. Well, the main feature is going to be the main beef of this episode. So we'll take a quick break, and then we'll be back to talk all things H.P. Lovecraft. Stay tuned. All right, and let's kick off this H.P. Lovecraft Stuart Gordon special strong. So Jeff, when did you come to the works of H.P. Lovecraft?
So I grew up in a small town here in Saskatchewan. So in my formidable years, when I was like a teenager, is when I first started hearing about him, as he kind of permeated my, the popular culture that I was into at the time. So same thing I'm into now. So horror movies and heavy metal and horror stories. So in 1984, Metallica put out their second album, Ride the Lightning, and there's a song on there called Call of Cthulhu. Yeah. And that was the first time I'd heard Cthulhu, the word Cthulhu. 85, Iron Maiden put out an album called Live After Death. And on the cover, Eddie is bursting out of a grave. And on the tombstone, there's a quote from H.P Lovecraft on their cover. Then the year after that, 86, Metallica puts out Master of Puppets, and there's a song on there called The Thing That Should Not Be. So at the same time, Stephen King is starting to proclaim that H.P. Lovecraft is one of the greatest horror writers, if not the greatest that's ever lived. Reanimator comes out in 85. From Beyond comes out in 86. So all of a sudden, all the stuff that I was into, H.P. Lovecraft seemed to be popping up. And this pre-internet days, right? So, and I lived in a small town, like I said, so it's not like Metallica's album came out and I had it the next week. It took a year or two for this stuff to come out. So the stuff was out and about, but by the time I got it was probably a year or two again after everything that was coming out. You know, we had the theater that in the town I lived in was like the Broadway theater, right? Just a single screen. So it's not like From Beyond was playing there when it came out that year. So I had to wait to, rent it on VHS. But that's where I first came into contact as he started to permeate the popular culture that I was into in the mid 80s. Then I started to track it down because of King and Metallica and Stuart Gordon's endorsing him. I got to figure out, what this guy's all about. And so then when I'd come to the city, I'd go to the bookstores and start scouring and looking for, as much of the stuff that I could find and buy. And then just started reading it and devouring it from there. And then when when I was in university and you'd be sitting on the bus coming home from school and you'd be reading a Lovecraft book, the people that knew it would stop and sit down and talk to you about it. So it was this clique of people that, oh man, you're reading Lovecraft. Have you read this? Have you read this? Have you read this? And the fans were fans. They were big fans into it. That's kind of my first exposure and my first, time I started reading them. What about you?
I can't remember the exact time where I discovered Lovecraft, but I would have to say the first movie that I saw that made me aware of him was In the Mouth of Madness, the John Carpenter movie, which was a loose adaptation of At the Mountains of Madness. And I love that movie till this day. And so I always wanted to, I heard the words like cosmic horror being thrown around or Lovecraftian horror. And that actually leads me to my question to you. Like, what is Lovecraftian horror to you? Because so many people just think if there's tentacles in it, it's a Lovecraft story, which that's semi-true. Like there's definitely roots back to Lovecraft and the Cthulhu and all the sea monster stuff and creatures. But to me, it's much more than that. I wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, to me, it's got to have that cosmic element in it. To me, it's cosmic horror to me, and the roots of it. If you Google movies influenced by Lovecraft, you'll get a list that includes like The Lighthouse.
Yeah, totally.
And the Lighthouse, the equivalent there was, well, people are going insane and there's a mermaid, so therefore it's influenced by Lovecraft. There's a bit of a stretch to me. I would say it's got to have those cosmic horror elements and specific themes of helplessness and hopelessness that we'll see in the movies that we're going to talk about today. But when I kind of go through a bit of his history, I didn't want to just, rattle off some history that everybody can look up on Wikipedia. I want to talk about some of the stuff that happened in his life and then some themes that, kind of run through his writing based on what's happened in his life. And to me, it's got to be cosmic, and it's got to have some of these themes or most of these themes that run through it to really be considered Lovecraft.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah, like I said, my knowledge of the man himself is quite brief. I've read a bunch of his short stories by now, and I was actually reading DAGON this morning after watching that. Spoiler, DAGON, that was my first time watch last night. I hadn't seen it before. At least I thought I did, but I definitely haven't. So I was reading his story there, and yeah, it's just his way of writing. You can just pick up pretty much any piece. Like you could go to any paragraph that he's written, and you'll be able to tell that it's Lovecraft just by his style. Sure. He's got such a distinct writing style. But yeah, like that's and I know like I've just heard, so that's why I'm happy that you're here. I've heard about his really troubled upbringing and like the town that he was living in and everything. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. So he was, I'll, kind of go in some chronological order with him. So we're talking about somebody that, literally 100 years ago we're going to be talking about, but he's never been more popular now than ever.
Yeah.
So he was born in 1890. His father died when he was 8. He had a psychotic break and was committed to the mental institution when he was 3, and he was in a mental institution for 5 years. We know a lot about Lovecraft's life from all the letters that he wrote. He was heavily into corresponding with people and writing, letters with people. Some people have done some background research on his life himself, but most of what we know is from what he would write to other people. So his father was in an insane asylum, probably driven insane by untreated syphilis. His mother, by all accounts, wasn't very nice to him. She made him stay inside most of the time because she didn't want him bothering other people. She was diagnosed with a mental illness and committed to the same asylum, and she died there in 1921. So both parents in the same asylum, both driven insane, both died there. And that theme of insanity really runs through his work. The characters can't cope with the truths that they're discovering and they're witnessing. And actually, if they learn too much, they just simply go insane. So talking about what makes Lovecraftian horror, to me, there needs to be an element of that man is ignorant, because if you know too much, you're going to go crazy from that. And your brain is actually protecting you by not letting you understand what's going on around you. And I think we'll see that in the movies we're going to talk about too.
Yeah, totally. That's definitely a theme that I always associate with Lovecraft, is the fear of the unknown and knowing too much. So that makes sense that it runs so deep in his life. Yeah, and like there are theories that he was like a product of inbreeding, because like his whole town was very they had a high population of inbred people in there. So just being around that and hearing about his parents, you can just imagine how fucked that would make you. Like how mentally destroyed you could be from just seeing the world that way. Like he obviously did not see the world the way that a lot of us luckily do.
Yeah, no, he was like, when he was a kid, he was really sickly. He never finished high school. He rarely left the house during the day because he would have panic attacks and he just didn't like being around people. There's letters that reference him having panic attacks in school and just not really being able to fit in with other kids. So they just kept him at home. But when he was a little kid, his grandfather was quite wealthy and they lived, a fairly comfortable life. But when he was a teenager and his grandfather died, the lawyer messed up the inheritance. There was no money left. They went from living in a quite comfortable life to now him and his mother moved in with another family and shared like a shithole house. So, just nothing really positive as a kid in those formidable years. And then if you look at the themes in some of his writing, a lot of the heroes in the tales are, loners and they're isolated. They're kind of socially reclusive and they're not, playboys or gallivanting around like other stories you would have read in the 20s and 30s. And then they usually have some sort of academic or scholarly traits to them that kind of make up for their shortcomings. So again, in the movies we're going to talk about, no one there is, none of those characters are really, outgoing, but they're smart, right? So they kind of make up for that.
Yeah, totally. It just makes sense that a guy like him would get so lost in his work, and especially lost in these types of worlds that, he's obviously living to him is probably just mundane. Like he wasn't getting any attention, didn't have very many friends. So like a lot of the great artists out there, they find their passion when they're forced to be alone and face themselves. So it's tough to say how if he would have been the writer that he is, or that he was, if he were, not a victim of these circumstances.
Yeah, I think he just felt like he never really fit in. And then when his work started to get picked up, That didn't happen until he was 33. Started to get published into pulp magazines, mostly in Weird Tales is where you'll hear most of his stories were. And the pulps at that time were called pulp magazines because they were printed on really cheap pulp paper. So they were throwaway magazines. They were 10, 15 cents. There was other magazines out there that were glossy. They were called glossies, and those were the more, elaborate magazines that had a bit more weight behind them. But the pulps were just read them once, kind of throw them away. As a kid, if you went up to the newsstand, you had your choice of pulps. Like there was fantasy, there was horror, there was railroad, there was romance, there was mystery. So the chance of you picking up something and reading about Lovecraft was pretty small. So some of them had a big circulation, some of them kind of limited. But when he started to get published in the pulps, I think he found a bit of a belonging and a bit of a community there because there was other writers that were doing the same thing as he was doing. And then, a year after he got published in the pulps and he started to make very, very little money. The pulps paid between 0.5 cent and 1 cent a word. So there's, no way he was making a living on that. He did manage to meet a woman. He was 34 at this time. She was a Jewish immigrant, which will play into what we're going to talk about later. And she was like super successful. She was a journalist. She traveled for work all the time. She was making enough money that she would mail him an allowance when she wrote. And that lasted about 2 years. And then he was divorced, and that was the end of that. So another theme that you kind of see in his writing is there's very few female characters. If there is a female character, that relationship is kind of sinister, mysterious. It's almost all men that are the characters and that are interacting with each other in his stories.
Yeah, and while we're on that topic, it's also mostly always white men. So like I don't know about I'm familiar with the controversy, but I have no idea where when it first started being dug up and how people are talking about it makes it hard to praise a man that's this brilliant when we know that he was a sexist and racist.
Yeah.
So where does that stuff kind of stem from?
Yeah, I think what's happened is as his popularity that we're talking about is more popular now than ever. As that popularity has grown, people are taking a more critical look at some of those letters and reading more into them and taking a more critical look at the the racism doesn't appear in too many stories, but it does appear in the stories, and I don't want to gloss over that. But it definitely appears in the letters. So we're talking about a time between the world wars when he's doing his writing, right? So World War II hasn't happened yet, but he's got letters in there where he's talking about how much he likes Hitler.
Oh God.
Yeah, he's talking about African Americans being an inferior race to the whites. He was a white supremacist. There's no other way to put it. And I think as people are starting to, as he becomes more popular and people are starting to read more about it and saying, wait a minute, taking a more critical look at that stuff, that's where the struggle's coming in. And struggle for me too, because as I start to look at it, and can you separate the art from the artist? Because that's what I've been doing. I'm a fan of H.P. Lovecraft's work. I'm not a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. Yeah. And is that the right thing to do? And it's something that I struggle with, and I throw it to you for your thoughts on that.
It's very tough, and especially I don't know, we're living in this day and age where obviously you're listening to a podcast where at one point not too long ago we had a segment of the show called the Cancellation Corner. So we were buying into this whole cancel culture, and there's obviously people need to be held accountable for their actions, and you certainly won't hear either of us praise Lovecraft as a person, but it makes it so hard because his body of work is bigger than he is, and that's the case for a lot of these situations. And you look at guys like Roman Polanski. One of my favorite movies of all time is Rosemary's Baby, but it's it's a struggle to even condone watching that movie anymore, just because what the monster who is behind it.
Yeah.
And, obviously you got to look at his upbringing. He's clearly troubled. And, I'm one of those guys who I do believe in rehabilitation, but that's just not an option with H.P. Lovecraft. He died when he was 47 years old. So yeah, he died very young. He was obviously messed up, but there's no excuses for that, and it makes it really hard to want to, Luckily, he's not getting any money right now because he's dead. But
Yeah.
like, it's a tough subject because I didn't know about, like, I don't know when you found out about all that stuff, but I found out about it like way, way, way after I had seen From Beyond and Reanimator and then read some of his short stories, and I never really picked up on any of that stuff. It was actually like I read an article about what his cat's name was, which was the N-word man, and it's like that's just brutal. It's just brutal to imagine supporting someone like that.
Yeah, no, I'm the same as you. I've been I've read the work for do the math, 40 years, and this is, or not 40 years, 20 years, I can't do the math, but it's been recent where this is really, there's more articles and more critical looks taking at him. Awards that were named after him for outstanding writing are being changed because people don't want a Lovecraft of a bust of him in their homes anymore. So it's been recent for me too. And I think he nailed it with some of the, I want to say, people saying, well, that's how it was back then, right? This is the Great Depression, and it's the 30s, and people were looking for someone to blame what happened, and whites were considered a superior race at that time. But fuck that. Like, there's millions of non-whites that were like, no, this isn't right. So you can't just brush it under the rug saying, well, he was a product of his time, but because not everybody felt that way, right? It was him.
That's always a lame, like that's always something that people always bring up is like, it was a different time, blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah, that's why, like, like when people are more lenient on their racist grandpas or racist uncles and stuff like that, like it's just not, there's a certain level of hate that has to be in your heart to actually feel that way. And I don't think that has anything to do with the time. That just is going to be like, you're just a flawed person and maybe not an overly intelligent person to the point. Like, that's why it's hard with the debate of H.P. Lovecraft, because he was clearly talented and smart with what he was doing. But as a human, he was just an idiot because he was ignorant to it all.
Yeah. And I mean, this was, the Great Depression was the worst economic times in American history so far. And
I feel like we got another one coming up.
A lot of people were going through some terrible shit. So to say, while he had a bad upbringing and it just doesn't fly anymore. So I struggle with it more. I'm not sure what to do with it. For a long time I separated the art from the artist, but I'm open to thoughts from you and your listeners on, how do you deal with this?
Yeah. And I'd be curious to hear what our listeners would think. So like, if you are listening, you can message us on our website, www.theterrortable.com, or at theterrortable@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this, and we'll read it on an upcoming episode if you'd like. But it's tough, man. Cause like, we're both huge music fans as well, especially in metal and punk. And, that shit's like, people are, there's no secrets anymore, which is a good thing to an extent. Like, when people are being held accountable for their, unspeakable actions. Like, I'm thinking of guys like Jesse Lacey of Brand New. I'm not sure if you were ever a Brand New fan, but that was a band that I was a very, very, very big fan of them. I honestly consider them my favorite band for years and years and years because of the singer's writing. Like, I loved his stories that he would tell in his songs. But then finding out about him as a person, I'm like, damn, I related to this piece of shit. Like, it makes you question yourself, and it's like, are my morals skewed, and is there something wrong with me? But I think it's all about just having that conversation and knowing that, like, just not ignoring it. That's why I'm happy we're talking about it on this, because at a certain extent, like, are we going to write these movies off like that Stuart Gordon and Brian Usna worked their asses off on? Like, all these people, like, you look at guys like Jeffrey Combs and Barbara Crampton, they made like illustrious careers because of them, because of H.P. Lovecraft's stories. So that there's a positive impact in the world. But I think as long as you're holding the people accountable and you're not just like forgetting and brushing it off, that's really all you can do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I'm not going to throw these movies out.
And so then that's why I, made the point of saying that his wife, who he was married to briefly, was a Jewish immigrant. So by all accounts, he didn't like Jewish people. He was a fan of Hitler, but he married a Jewish woman. So he was not a great person, and he was super confused.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think we covered that pretty well. Is there anything else you want to talk about in terms of Lovecraft and his inspiration on the world? Like, let's talk about his work, the inspiration that his work has had on the world. We already talked about Metallica and Iron Maiden. Like, that stuff's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so when he did have some friends through correspondence, through letters, and he was friends with Houdini. A year after he became friends with Houdini died. He was friends with Robert E. Howard, who was at the same time inventing his own mythology of Conan, writing in the pulps. When Robert E. Howard was 30, he drove out to the desert and shot himself. So there's another theme that kind of goes through the writing is a sense of hopelessness and helplessness, and that we have no control over what's happening, and it's just going to happen. And it's just a big, vast universe that doesn't give a shit about us. And I think that's one of the, going back to when did I first start reading about him? When I started to read that kind of stuff, that was a super brand new, ideas to me. And for some reason that was really appealing to what I was reading. By the time he died, he was unknown. He was penniless. He was eating expired food. And you see all those pictures of him. He's really got like skinny. He's very skinny. He's very pale.
Looks sickly. Yeah,
he was sick. Like, he wasn't eating. He didn't have any money. And even when he died, when he was, 46, 47 years old, there was no money for a tombstone. The tombstone came in the 70s when a few fans got some money together and put up a tombstone for him. So he died completely unknown, except for a few of the pulp magazines that had his stories in them. So he was writing, like we said, in the 20s and 30s. If you take a look at, what was popular fiction at that time. So it's like, the Great Gatsby and the Grapes of Wrath and Gone with the Wind. So, if you're sitting around with your friends and you're like, oh, you've read any good books lately? And someone's like, oh man, I read The Great Gatsby, and I'm, wondering about the American dream and how do I fit in, and overindulgence, and I'm, struggling with this. And you're like, oh yeah, I read about this story where there's like, we're in one dimension and there's all these other dimensions. And if you're like in a place where they cross, this like witch will come through it because it's a portal and she'll convince you to kill children. People would be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, he was like one of the original edgelords.
Yeah, and he wouldn't, like, he never did revisions, right? He was, if you didn't want his story, he didn't care. Like, people like Robert E. Howard had agents, or they're out there pushing his work and saying, if you change this or change this or change this, I think we could publish it. And he would, because he was a writer. But Lovecraft just wouldn't. If you didn't want his story, he wouldn't revise it. He wouldn't rework it. He'd just, I'll just sit, right? So he just wasn't connecting to people at the time. What I did was take a look at like to tie back into your podcast, some of the popular horror movies at the time, right? So in the 20s, people were into Phantom of the Opera and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And then when you get into the 30s, it's like Dracula and Frankenstein and The Mummy. Like, there's no talk of aliens in outer space. No. He just wasn't resonating with anybody, right? Get into the 40s and 50s and the atomic age and advancements in science and space exploration. Then you start to see some of those movies that are going to have that theme in them, right? So you got Godzilla, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and The Blob. That's kind of closer to what he was writing, and people were opening their mind and knew, that maybe some of this stuff is resonating now. And then when you get into the 60s, that's when you start to see some of his stuff being produced. So 1963, The Haunted Palace was based on a case of Charles Dexter Ward. 65, Die Monster Die was based on The Color Out of Space. In 67, The Shuttered Room. In 1970, The Dunwich Horror. The same time, The Twilight Zone and Night Gallery were starting to use his influences. So now you're starting to see people get it, right? They're understanding what he's talking about and they're interested in it. When before, if I went to the movie with my girlfriend and watched Dracula, why would I have no interest in reading about a giant monster that lives at the bottom of the ocean? It's just resting, waiting there to destroy mankind. It just didn't make sense to me, right?
That's a really good observation. I never really thought of that, but it also ties into like where we're at as a culture and like horror films now is everything's been done. We're at the point where like people are trying so hard to find a different way to be creative, but everything has seemingly been done, and that's why I think people are they're going back to his work, because you can find just like some of the most bizarre stories and the craziest ideas that people would never have dreamed of putting on screen because they just didn't have the resources to do so. And then now you have Richard Stanley's Color Out of Space. You look at that, like that's a movie that just like would not have been able to happen. And it's now known and people love it because it's so fucking nuts.
Yeah, I think you can take a look at horror movies as a reflection of what was happening at the time and what was resonating with people and what were they going to be scared of, right? And the stuff that he was writing at the time was so out there. I mean, that it doesn't even scare me because I can't even really understand it, right? Yeah. But you make a good point on what's resonating now and what's new. Well, I think, especially in this last year, all these conspiracy theories that are, bigger than ever, right? There's thousands of people right now that think that the earth is flat, right? And if you don't understand that, they get frustrated that you can't understand it. How come you can't see what I see, right? There's people that think that President Trump was waging a war against Satan worshiping pedophiles, right? They believe that, right? And how come you can't see that? And that's Lovecraft, man. Like, how come you can't understand that there is a race of like people that are half fish and half human, and they're like going to bring this God from the bottom of the ocean? Like, how come you can't understand that? And I'm tired of trying to explain it to you, right? That's resonating with people with all the crazy conspiracies that people are like, well, yeah, that's true. I totally believe that.
Yeah, the fuck, that's so true. Yeah, great observations. Well, if you want, like, unless you have other things you want to talk about here, we can just get into the double feature.
Yeah, just to touch base on the Color Out of Space. I think you're right. The advancements in technology is making these movies possible, and the two we're going to talk about were great, especially for the time. What makes making his movies so difficult is the language that he uses, that a lot of things are undescribable, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of things are your feeble human brain can't really grasp them. So he'll try to explain what it looks like, but he really leaves it up to the reader to understand that. So like in The Color Out of Space, the color itself is from the elements and the particles on the comet that are like hanging in the air, and it's an undescribable color. Because humans haven't seen this color before and you can't really grasp it. But in the movie, it's pink, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, we'll see that in From Beyond as well.
Yeah, for sure. That it's difficult to get your, really stay true to the story, because a lot of it is leaving up to you. Some of the monsters that he got are, that he's created are so outrageous, like, they're oily blobs that are just eyes. Well, that's what I see in my head. It's completely different from what you see in your head. But then somebody puts it on the screen, you're like, oh, it's not as scary as I thought it was going to be. Del Toro has been trying to make a At the Mountains of Madness movie for the last decade. And he just can't get the money to do it. James Cameron was attached to co-produce it. Tom Cruise was going to star in it. And if anybody can pull it off and make it as close to that content as it can be and get the same vision that people see when they read it, I think it's probably him.
Oh God, I would love to see a Guillermo del Toro like Lovecraft story.
Yeah, I've been kind of following it for years, and there was, at one point it has to be rated R. There's no way to get around the violence in the book is fantastic. Like he's one person who can pull it off, but I think for a long time the the film community just thought that rated R couldn't make enough money for what it was going to cost to do that. But I think that's changed now with some of the success of some of the rated R films that we've seen out there.
Yeah, totally. And you can I think the bottom line, the moral of this story is, in order to pull off Lovecraft, you got to be an absolute fucking madman or madwoman. Like, you got to be insane. And one of those people that was able to do it is Stuart Gordon, who directed both of the films that we're discussing today. We're going to start with From Beyond and then go on to Dagon. But yeah, Stuart Gordon passed away in March of last year. But he left behind a bunch of fantastic horror films. Like he's the man behind Reanimator, From Beyond, Dolls, which is very underrated. If you haven't seen Dolls, it's actually great. The Pit and the Pendulum remake with Lance Henriksen, Castle Freak, Dagon, and Space Truckers. Have you seen Space Truckers?
I have not seen Space Truckers, no.
I completely forgot about. I still have never seen it, but I remember seeing the cover of it at the movie store all the time, and it's just like such a bizarre idea. But then, yeah, and then you talked about recently that he did 2 episodes of Masters of Horror. So you look at it, and that's like a good chunk of his filmography is tied to H.P. Lovecraft and his stories. So yeah, we got him pulling that off, and then also both of these are Brian Yuzna collaborations. So Brian Yuzna was a legendary director behind the body horror classic Society. He did Bride of Reanimator, Return of the Living Dead 3, Necronomicon, The Dentist, Silent Night, Deadly Night 4 and 5. So this is another madman. And it would make sense as to, I think we can both just say, like, we'll start talking about it, but I really like both of these movies.
Yeah, and I think you're dead on that Stuart Gordon got Lovecraft. He understood the vision, and he was able to visually pull it off, even with the limitations that he had in staying. Well, the story From Beyond is like 3,000 words. It's like 6 or 7 pages, and it's a loose adaptation, but you almost need that at some extent, to some extent, because that gives you the freedom to do what you want with the story and still make it Lovecraft, I think.
Yeah, no kidding. And he did the same thing with Reanimator. Like I know the story of Reanimator is so different from the actual film. So he takes his own like he puts his own stamp on everything. But I think like for the most part he's been successful almost his whole career, especially in the ones that I had named off here before. But so From Beyond is also, it's starring Jeffrey Combs, the always exuberant Jeffrey Combs. We also have Ken Foree thrown in here from Dawn of the Dead as the masculine cop. Is he a cop, a detective? So one of those things.
Detective Bubba.
Yeah, Detective Bubba. And then we got Barbara Crampton, the patron saint of 80s horror. And like, let's just get our gross masculinity out of the way right now and just say, good mother God, Jesus, she has always been so gorgeous. Like, but she's also like, she's in so many movies that I love, and she's always great in them. And there's a film that I'm going to be talking about on an upcoming episode that I watched. I'm not talking about here because I need Kyle and Boozy for that one. But she's in a new movie called Run, Hide, Fight, and she plays a teacher. And it's like, she's the same age as my parents, and she looks 40. Like, she looks so good. Yeah. But I love that she came back to acting. She came back after a long hiatus for You're Next, the Adam Wingard slasher film, which she played the mom in. And she's great in that too. And now she's been taking on more and more roles, and it's nice to have her back, because there just is only one Barbara Crampton. I know that's, obviously, but it's like no one does it like her, and no one has the on-screen presence as her. So I'm hoping that can get all my male horniness out of the way, and we can just move on.
Well, we can say that she's like super attractive and super hot in these movies, but also very, very talented. Like, she's the I was reading that Gordon wanted to cast her for this role, and the executives are like, I don't know, she's, she might look too young and too good looking to be believable as a doctor. And he's like, come on, like, this is the perfect person to play this.
Yeah, no, and that's true. And also that's just a thing in horror movies. Like you look at just off the top of my head, As Above, So Below is all these like archaeologists, but they're all like hot teenagers, basically. Like they look like they're fresh out of high school and they all look like supermodels. It's like, yeah, people don't give a shit about that. Like especially Barbara Crampton, she delivers the goods. Like she's a good actress and she's just very talented.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and that was the part of this movie that you were going to be like, oh no, it's too much of a stretch. I mean,
yeah.
people aren't going to believe it.
Exactly. Yeah, no kidding. In such a bizarre movie. To be fair, in my notes, I do actually have a little bit of a criticism about it because, like, okay, let's just get into it here.
Every journey begins in the mind. A flight of imagination. A vision of what might lie across the universe. Or within the deepest regions of the subconscious. Dr. Edward Pretorius is about to embark on such a journey.
It's out of control. You've got to turn it off.
Something's coming.
Humans are such easy prey.
From the makers of Reanimator, from beyond.
The movie is built. It's based around Jeffrey Combs and his part. What I always forget his name. Ted Sorrell. So Dr. Edward Pretorius and Crawford Tillinghast, they build a resonator, which is a machine which allows whoever is within the range to see beyond normal perception of reality. And so it basically opens up another dimension, and it gives them they're accessing the pineal gland is what they say. I think that's where you get the little weird dick thing that comes out of Jeffrey Combs's head. And yeah, I don't know. It's just a machine that makes you hella horny and then see another dimension. Because they always talk about how they're getting, like Ken Foree's like, I got a bone. Does that explain my boner or my heart on? Like, you know what I'm talking about? It's so fucking weird.
Yeah, so as you might have collected from the way that Lovecraft thought about women, none of that's in the story. He didn't care about the building of the sex. He had no female characters in it. Well, there's a maid that goes missing very briefly, but the whole sex part, that's Stuart Gordon throwing that in there.
Yeah, and that's a good time to point out that I love the what's the word I'm looking for? Like people are making their own choices about what they're going to do with Lovecraft's work, as in include, like, for example, Lovecraft Country, the TV show, is an all black cast, like, or at least primarily black cast. And then you see that in Color Out of Space. You see it in From Beyond. You see it in almost like most of the best H.P. Lovecraft adaptations. They include people of color or like a strong connection to a female character. They build on that character to make the story better, or at least, suit the day and age that they were coming out in. I did not know that she wasn't in the story at all, because that's such a huge part of the story. It's all about that guy who's just way too horny and he's got a weird kink. And that's basically how this happens.
The story, like I said, the story was 3,000 words. So if we go do the math, Lovecraft got 15 or 30 bucks for it. And that was that. After he wrote it, and then it sat for like 14 years before anybody bought it or sold it. But the story itself is just the two male scientists, and the Jeffrey Combs character goes over to the other guy's house, and they talk about the resonator, and then it's destroyed before it can unleash any more madness on the world. It's pretty short. It's good, but it's the way that it rolled out on the cinema is totally different. And the addition, I agree with you. The Barbara Crampton character is super interesting character in that she's the hero of the story. Yeah. But she's also the one that keeps making them turn the machine back on and getting into the situations that they're in.
Yeah, she just can't stay away from the sexy robot machine that makes everyone turned on. Yeah, it's such a strange concept, but at the same time, like this movie, I think it clocks in at about an hour and 26 minutes, somewhere around there. God, is it lean, and just it gets right down to the point, and it moves so fast. The pacing is no issue in this film. Like, it is just so solid front to back, and you also have like like what we were mentioning before, that like the Lovecraft color, like in the color out of space, like obviously it's very similar to what you see in From Beyond. It's basically like a gory pink, magnificent purple bouquet of cotton candy and nerds. Like it looks like cotton candy to me, and I love that, and it's so gorgeous to look at.
Yeah, and it's got the, you know, in the original story, you can't see the creatures. They're indescribable, right? They're not like the fish and stuff. But to stay true to Lovecraft, because Gordon got it, the main monster is a slime ball that's constantly shifting and changing and adjusting, and he's slimy and he's a blob. And I mean, that just comes from knowing, you know, the author's other work.
Yeah, totally. And then you have the incredible effects team behind this movie. So they had K&B with it, which was like Bob Kurtzman, Howard Berger, and Greg Nicotero. And they not only had those guys, but they also had John Carl Buechler, who is like the director of Friday the 13th Part 7. He did like one of my favorite Jason designs for Part 7. Jason looks amazing in that, but he's a legendary effects artist. And then Mark Sjostrom, who worked on a bunch of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies, most notably for his work in Dream Warriors. So you look at these heavy hitters, like these guys, they're the best in the business, is all working on this movie. And it shows. Like the effects are unreal. There's obviously some computer generated effects as well, which don't look as good, but it actually it adds to the campy nature of the film. And I enjoy watching that. I know we're going to have a different discussion when we get to Dagon, but the makeup in this film is just nuts.
Yeah, and Reanimator, as you mentioned, came out the year before with pretty much the same team. I think it did so well that's where the extra money came through to put some extra cash into this budget and get the effects up to where they thought it needed to be. But, you know, when I was, you know, in the late 80s, early 90s, there was so much good horror coming out, films that time. This movie got a little bit lost in the mix, so I hope people go back and take another look at it, because it's really strong.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's tough because like I'm a huge Reanimator fan, but like honestly, From Beyond is not far behind for me. Like there are probably days where I'll say From Beyond is my favorite Stuart Gordon movie. But yeah, I love the pink hue over the lens, and the worm creature eating Jeffrey Combs is exceptional. Like it's so cool. The part I was talking about though is Dr. Catherine McMichaels, Barbara Crampton, being oddly okay with like being okay with this whole thing after seeing a creature from another dimension. Like she's very chill in her in the scene following that, like where she's first exposed and, you know, realizes that Combs isn't crazy. He's telling the truth. And so that's like a criticism I could see if you really wanted to pick at something, but like, I don't know. She made up for it in that dominatrix suit. So
I was reading an interview, and somebody asked her what happened to that suit, and she sold it at a garage sale.
Oh my God. Gross. Just imagine the people who buy lingerie or like gimp suits from fucking garage sales. It's, oh God. It's like, yeah, it's buying secondhand underwear. Just not I don't get it. But yeah, and I think the addition of Ken Foree, is Ken Foree's character in the story?
No?
Okay, yeah, because he's such a huge addition to the story, because you have like, he's your masculine character when Combs is just being nuts and erratic and running around. You have Ken Foree to kind of be the voice of reason. But he has one of my favorite quotes in the movie. One of the lines when Barbara Crampton's trying to talk to him about how she wants to go upstairs and get the resonator going again. He's like, "I know this behavior. I've seen it on the streets. You may be a doctor, but you're acting just like a junkie." It's such a corny line. I've seen this on the streets.
And the scene where he gets eaten by what looks like bees. I don't know. It's a bit of a weird choice there. But the special effects in that scene where his death scene is awesome.
Oh yeah. And then are you talking about, Jeffrey Combs is sucking I'm getting these mixed up right now, but a man sucks an eyeball out of a woman's face and then sucks out her blood for nutrients to grow his mega mind.
Yeah. That's Jeffrey Combs. And then later on, Detective Bubba they all get stormed by like what look like bees, and then they eat Bubba, and he's laying on the ground as like a skeleton with his hands waving.
Yeah, totally. Oh, it's a great movie. So I think we can both highly recommend watching From Beyond if you haven't seen it, or revisiting it if it's been a while. You want to talk about Dagon? Do you have anything else you want to talk about for From Beyond?
Nope. No, I'm ready to go to Dagon.
It's coming from that village. Probably some sort of religious festival. Hey, that thing's coming right at us.
There's something in the water.
We're gonna have to take the raft into that town for help.
Where the hell is everybody?
Hello? We need help. What the hell's going on here? Who are you?
I've been waiting for you. Stay with me, please. Don't let them take me. We will go soon to a beautiful place, forever.
You wanna tell me why this is happening?
Dagon needs her.
You're a bunch of freaks! I'll kill you all!
Dagon!
All right, cool. This one, I'm going to be relying more on you. Would you be able to give our listeners a synopsis of Dagon?
Sure. So you mentioned that you read the short story Dagon.
I didn't finish it, but I was reading it.
Okay. This movie's not based on that, which is super confusing. Super confusing. It's based on a short novella called The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Yes.
It's got some of the same elements as Dagon, but if you read The Shadow over Innsmouth, it's clear that what's happening there in the plot. Okay, so yeah, off the top of my head, I don't know the characters' names of what. So there's a couple of Paul and his girlfriend.
I'll look it up here for you quickly. So we got the actors are Ezra Godin, Francisco Rabal, Raquel Marino, and I think those are the key players that we're working with, because the rest of the film is pretty much set around a town of erratic sea people. Yeah,
so the main character and his girlfriend and an older couple are celebrating that they've sold their they made a bunch of money on their .com company, which I believe was called .com. When this was 2002, and a storm rolls in, and I think the skies are sunny in the movie for like maybe the first 3 minutes, and when that storm rolls in, I think the storm stays for the rest of the movie. So the boat crashes against the rocks, and one of the older woman becomes pinned underneath, and so they have to go to shore to try to get some help to get her free. So the Paul and his girlfriend go to shore, and then they just start meeting weird characters everywhere they go in this Spanish town, and Paul is basically on the run and hiding for the rest of the movie as he's trying to figure out what's going on with what's happening in this town, and I'm trying to get help, and now his girlfriend's gone missing, and he runs into an older man who gives the backstory of this town was very poor and had no economical income. They were going to the church to try to get advice from God, and somebody came into the church and said, if you want real riches, if you want to be really wealthy, follow Dagon. And so then they become this cult of creatures that are living underneath the sea that start having relations with the people of the village in exchange for riches and gold. And now there's these half fish, half people walking around that are running the town, and they don't want Paul to get their secret out. And I guess I'm thinking here in the meantime, he's found another very beautiful woman who he's becoming infatuated with. And do we want to give away the ending?
Hold that thought for 2 seconds. Are you a hockey fan?
Yep.
She looks like Paulina Gretzky. She does. She looks very much like Paulina Gretzky, so that's a huge compliment to her. But I was like, whoa, like they're like doppelgangers. Except
Are
for
we
she has
giving-
red hair. Yeah,
Do you
let's
want to
give
give
away.
away the ending? Okay, so as the story starts to unfold, and Paul's still looking for his girlfriend, but he's now also fallen in love with this girl that he's dreaming about, and uncovers that she's a mermaid, but instead of like a fishtail, she's got tentacles. So that's got the Lovecraft influence in it there. And then the big finish is like a crazy gore fest where they're going to take his girlfriend. He finds his girlfriend, but they're going to sacrifice her to Dagon so that she can be impregnated and raise some more fish people. And through a series of events that make a lot more sense than what I'm describing, the main character figures out that the girl that he's been falling in love with is his sister, and he's actually a relative of the city, and he sets himself on fire as he's trying to escape, and as his face is burning and he falls into the water, he just accepts his fate, that he is part of these people. And there's a horrifying scene at the end where he just says, this is the way it is, and him and his sister, go under this murky water to go be with this ancient god that lives underneath the ocean.
Such a bonkers idea. It's a miracle that this movie was made and pulled off even slightly well.
It's crazy, and it holds pretty true to the actual story, except again for the female characters, because Lovecraft wouldn't have any interest in that. But the whole thought of, this is really what's happening, and how come people can't understand it? And my mind's trying to get around it. And then when your mind finally does understand and you can comprehend what's happening, you just kind of give in, and you're going to have to live underneath the ocean with this really scary god that at the end, that end scene is scary.
Yeah, it is. It's wild. And yeah, like, because that's the thing, is that this movie is very inconsistent with the effects work, which is something that you kind of I know I've been talking a lot about that in both these movies, but it's because it's such a key part of pulling off these stories. But at the same time, once again, the like 2000s CGI aesthetic kind of works for the movie, and it works in its favor. Like, I'm talking about when you see like the fish legs and the fish hands, like those all look great. There's a couple like questionable scenes that just look like they were made on a fucking one of those giant Macs that were different colored back in the day that every kid had. Yeah, like, I don't know. But the movie itself, I was very surprised by how much I actually enjoyed it and how intense it was. The tension works really well in this movie, and it's just a terrifying concept, and I think they really pulled it off with all the crazy townsfolk running after him, and you have your lead character. We could have used a little bit more of a charismatic lead, but he did what he needed to do, I guess. Like, you definitely feel like he's no Jeffrey Combs, and that's something that the movie might be missing a little bit.
Yeah, he's kind of a goofball, and he just, he's not, super likable. And then he has a real character shift when he starts to accept who he is and come to terms with it. Then, I think he's a bit more likable. But the gore is really well done. The special effects are, I don't know what happened there. Like, some of them don't even really color match to what's happening.
No.
It looked really odd, but the whole film has got, how I mentioned that when that storm rolls in and the storm stays, that whole film's got a real gloomy, dread look to all the time. It's raining, it's dark. Once Paul starts running from the things, he was running and hiding for 90% of the movie, and it's the tension that's built there, and the look of it is really effective.
Yeah, totally. And I love the scene where he, what's his character's name? Yeah, Paul. When he's removing, he's like, they discover him inside the building, and then he has to he uses his Swiss Army knife to get the lock off of one door and put it on the next door so that it's like that little tiny lock. But even that, like, it's just a very good tense scene. And then I love all the little like nuances with all the people with the cobwebbed hands, or like the webbed hands, and the gills on their neck. Like, I just thought that all that was really well thought out. But yeah, it's just a wild movie that I would have liked to see done with the effects team that did From Beyond. But at the same time, like you said, that the setting of that movie, the setting alone is a character. Like it's a really cool setting. I love that fish, like the small fishing town.
Yeah, it's a little small Spanish town that they shot it in that works perfectly, and that super dirty, disgusting hotel room that he finds himself in. I don't know how much of that was real or not, but it looked pretty freaking real. So
yeah, no, that place is gross.
Yeah, super effective.
Yeah, that like I wonder if that was on a set or anything, or if that was just an actual place in that town. Because yeah, good God, that was gross. This movie reminded me of another movie that I know we both saw recently, is the Block Island Sound. Do you see any like Lovecraft inspirations in the Block Island Sound?
Yeah, good comparison. It's now that you mention that, I hadn't thought of that, but now you mention it, it's got a real similar feel to it, and a similar look, I think too. With it's very dark and dreary, and you're given a lot of clues to what's happening, but especially Block Island Sound, I didn't put it all together until the big reveal at the end. But when you look back, yeah, everything was there, and my feeble human brain should have been able to put that together, but I couldn't. So maybe there's some Lovecraft influence in there.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching it again, because I do feel like there's parts that I may have missed or something. Because yeah, it's one of those movies that you just want to let it do its thing and try and let it surprise you, and it definitely did that for me. But it's not even out yet, so anyone listening, if you're into this kind of stuff, the Block Island Sound, keep an eye out for that. I know the trailer's out right now, and it's great. But yeah, this was a great conversation, Jeff. I don't know if you have anything else you want to talk about with DAGON, but I feel like we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, try to overlook some of those special effects, focus on the story, and I think people will enjoy it.
Yeah, definitely. And it's available on Tubi. The Terror Table Tubi plug. This is that time. Nice. But yeah, it's free on Tubi. Actually, I'm pretty sure From Beyond is on there. I watched From Beyond on my Blu-ray because Mitch Clark gave me a Scream Factory Blu-ray of it. So that was a very, very nice present. And you gave me the gift of Mitch Clark.
It all comes around.
Yeah, all full circle. But yeah, this was great, Jeff. It was super interesting talking to you, and I learned a lot today. So is there anywhere that our listeners can follow you on Instagram, Twitter, or anything you want to plug?
Sure. Instagram is the Drake, but the with 4 underscores Drake. Because that's all that was available. I'm late to the game. Twitter is the _1 Drake, so you can follow me on either of those platforms. Yeah, if you like pretty much the same stuff that Mitch likes, if you like metal and horror and wrestling, then you can follow me and see what I'm up to.
Hell yeah. And I guess this would be a good time to also mention the Saskatoon Fantastic Film Festival, which is approaching its 12th consecutive year. And I know you and John and everyone's working behind the scenes to make that happen, but we're going to have an in-person festival again this year. So that's exciting.
Yeah, so far so good. We've got the dates that we announced. It's open for submissions. Find us on Facebook or Google us on our website to find out how to submit. And the submissions are rolling in, and we've started watching those so we can keep up as they continue to come in. Who knows what the world's going to look like in a few months, but right now we're planning in-person festival. We did it in November in the midst of the pandemic, and Mitch was there every day, and we followed the guidelines very strictly and followed everything that was being put out by the government, and we had no cases traced back to us, so that was successful. We had limited numbers, of course, but everybody who was there had a really good time, and we're going to try to do it again.
Hell yeah. Looking forward to it. Awesome. All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening to another episode of The Terror Table.